Hi, I'm Eric Lubau, and welcome to Beyond the Belt. This is a conversation with Brandon Gaspar, a black belt out of Ontario, Canada. Brandon is a former gold miner, current geologist, and now works as a research analyst doing technical due diligence on mineral development projects. I hope you enjoy our incredibly informative chat. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks
Tell
for
me what
having
it
me.
was like to be to get your black belt.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's surreal, that's for sure. It was a long journey, but it was just one of these moments where it's like, oh shit, this is happening. I don't know. I don't know if you could put it into words. It's this great feeling, probably the greatest, I call it the greatest achievement of my life, right? It's not, I guess just because it's just, so many people don't see it through. It makes it, that much more special. And people in jujitsu get it, but most people don't. Yeah.
Did it feel different for you? Like after you got it, did you feel like a different person or did you just feel like you had a target on your back?
That's funny. Yeah. In a lot of ways, yes. But I didn't so much feel different. I was just really proud, like very happy about it. Still didn't know what it meant. The belting thing was a weird, I kind of told you this offline, but like the belting idea of belts got kind of screwed up for me early on because just the path that I had taken and wasn't, in a conventional grading system for a long time. And by the time I got to brown, that was like kind of when that was the belt that felt okay. This feels right. This is the belt. But then I didn't know at that point. Well, wait a minute. Like, what's the difference between like how do I get to black from here? Like, what does that even look like? You know? It wasn't until after a little while of having it and feeling it, you kind of just start to say, like, okay, yeah, no, like I understand what it's, the what comes with the belt, but it doesn't just I don't know. It takes a ton of pressure off. I think like I never didn't put a ton of pressure on me. I don't care about you know I roll with everybody. I don't care about getting tapped or anything like that. It's just more of when I got it, I felt more just relaxed, like this huge. It's like I made it. This is great. That would like almost dial it back a bit.
You said you didn't know what it meant, but now but it's so that sort of like implies you kind of have an idea now. Like what does it mean to you now?
I think what I was kind of referring to was you. I think a lot of people when they get belts, some people get belts late, some people get belts early, right? It's like you get the belt, but you're kind of like you're a new blue belt, you're a new purple belt, right? Doesn't so you can't like measure yourself against like all these other belts, right? A four stripe purple belt is way different than a new purple belt, right? So it's but what I felt at that like everyone has that identity crisis, I think, or at first when they get a new belt, and I think I probably did for a little while, but as I started, you know, I travel a lot. I go to a lot of different gyms. I started rolling with more black belts and more black belts, and you kind of start to realize just the level that you're at, right? And you kind of just okay, like this feels right. This feels good. This is a pretty special thing to be at. Like you just look back to day one, like when you first walked into you tried your first jujitsu class, and you compare yourself to that person, not necessarily to everybody in your gym or something like that, or your professor or something that you start to really think about and appreciate the level that you're at. It's really like 1%, right? It's really special.
Yeah, you said though that you had a bit of a different journey. Do you like can you tell me a little bit about what
Yeah,
that
yeah.
different journey looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I started out jujitsu, I think kind of like a lot of people, you get kind of obsessed with like MMA at first, and you get into MMA and sparring and that type of thing, and then I tried jujitsu for the first time. Early on, I had kind of graduated from school and I moved. I took my first full-time job in a very remote community in a small mining town that didn't have anything like that. They had, kind of old school karate or something. But, I was fortunate enough. I had my brother there as well. And we had this sort of passion. We were like, okay, like this jujitsu thing could be really interesting. So we met a group of police officers that wanted to train jujitsu. So they were basically just doing the Gracie University stuff, which if people don't know, like that's like the curriculum the first kind of online curriculum that you could do that where you could actually earn a belt. And at the time, it was very controversial, but it opened up the door. So we were just self-taught for a long time, for like almost like six,
Wait,
seven
what year
years,
was this?
Uh, 2000, like 11, 2012. Well, it's kind of started in 2009, 2000. Yeah. So we were like, I got my blue belt in like 2012, 2013 or something like that. And I was still a blue belt when I left that community, like in 2018, 2019. Right. So like that whole time I had like maybe I think I did the all the way to like blue belt stripe two, I think. And then I moved to Toronto, the bigger city, and joined a gym and stuff like that. But the reason, like, what starts to happen is you go to all these other gyms, and then after a while, the belt thing kind of gets blurry because everybody you roll with or every professor you try to the gym, they all start telling you you're not a blue belt, you're a white belt. No, I'm kidding. But they'd be like, you're not a blue belt. Like you're like I would give you a purple belt today. Like some guys start saying that, so that starts getting in your head a little bit. And I just eventually just said like I don't care anymore. Like it's just fun to roll and move. That's it. Then it was like when I started training under people, right? A professor that wanted to, grade me. Then it just all kind of started happening pretty quickly, right? And even when by the time I got my purple belt, it was like I was just jaded. I was like, whatever, purple belt, move on. Like, kind of nice relief to kind of get the, maybe, stop being the sandbag blue belt. But it was like, I don't know, it just felt, I don't know, I don't want to say meaningless, but it didn't have the appeal of once upon a time. But when I got my brown belt, that was like the moment where it felt like I would be very much happy to just be at brown belt for a while. Like this feels right to me, right? Like just on whatever measuring stick I was using at that time, that's where I was like, I'm just very happy right here. So yeah.
And then was there like a suite of things that you placed on yourself or that your professor placed on you to make that transition, given that you started your early career teaching yourself effectively?
That's a good question. I had a couple different professors do different things. Even with that, there was still a transition, like coming from self-taught and coming to a gym with like, I was going from like very informal training where you're studying, like you're studying at home, then you're getting together with your teammates, and you've read the books, now you're applying it and you're sharpening it's really the collaborative minds that are making each other better, and that's why it worked. And but when I came to a gym, then it was structure, different rules. uh, no, we're doing this technique and this person's going to show you it, and it's like less talking. Like a lot of people don't want a lot of instruction, but the way my brain was, it was just way too analytical. It was like by that time, anyone that watches the Gracie programs, they go down to like the nitty gritty of the details. So you become like super analytical, and you can understand a technique quicker than probably people that are kind of just watching in the gym, right? There's less structure. You come to a gym, and we found this out early on, like our team that was just we were just a bunch of hobbyists teaching ourselves jujitsu, and we'd go to the bigger cities and compete in tournaments and beat the Gracie gyms that were, that had the black belts and, the training in person all the time. And we were like, well, like, there's something to this. And it was just like, it was about discipline. It was like we were training like 4 or 5 days a week, studying side control. Then it's like getting out of this escape, making it perfect, and then moving it on and go to the arm bars and go to this triangle, like all the fundamental stuff very early on, position before submission, all that stuff, but structured. Whereas if you go to the gym, maybe a professor teaches an arm lock today, and you happen to be there on a Wednesday, and then maybe you came on Saturday, and now he's teaching like back takes, and then on Monday you might have catch that class, and it's arm bar counters, and it's like, okay, there's some connection there. But depending on where you're catching that whatever the curriculum is in that school, you might be able to piece moves together, or it's just nothing's coming together in your jiu-jitsu because you're really just kind of showing up and trying to piece it together yourself. But I find uh,
Why do you think the Gracie University curriculum is so controversial?
well, at the time it was really controversial because they were only ones. Like, people have been learning jiu-jitsu online since the 90s, right? Or really, like, what I mean by that is videos. If you were a black belt in Canada, or wanted to get your, do jiu-jitsu in the 90s anywhere, you're probably watching those old school VHS tapes of the Gracie, challenges and stuff like that, and learning those old instruction videos. But what was different was, I think Henner and Huron started giving out belts, right? So here's all this instruction. I never have to meet you, but if you complete all these tests, which are, they're live videos, unedited, you have to do all these moves in a certain period of time so they can see the flow and the transitions. And then if they grade you online, and then they'll send you a belt. It sounds simple, and it took a lot of heat, but they changed it and polished it, and honestly, it was a lot harder than I think people give it credit for. I mean, maybe I put too much into it, but like, we, the Blue Belt Stripe 1 was like the most comprehensive program. Like, that was the part of jujitsu, my learning, that changed everything for me. Like, I still use it today. I still teach all of that stuff that I learned. Like, thousands of hours go into this, and you film yourself trying to do, these 6 7 minute long live sparring, or all these techniques where they're like, there's 60 something techniques, and you got to go through them all and smoothly and efficiently and not make any mistakes. I don't know. It was controversial because they were
Do you
giving
feel
out
like
the
you
blue
missed
belt.
out on anything from not having a, yeah, do you think you missed out on anything by not having a primary instructor? Or do you think that that actually benefited you not having that primary instructor because you had to follow the curriculum in that regimented specific way?
I think it's by the person, because there were guys that were just as obsessed with jujitsu and martial arts we were training with, but they just didn't get it. Like, they wouldn't go home and watch videos. Like, they wanted to show up and get their asses kicked and, learn that way. That's how they wanted. And they wanted somebody to give them a belt. They wanted a black belt to give them a belt at the end of the day. Like, that's what they focused on. That was the whole thing. But in my head, I like training with some of these. I'm like, we're all progressing in the same direction right now. Like, what's the difference, right? But it's how you learn. If you're not super analytical, like, some people just need to get beat up all the time, and they just get better slowly just by showing up because they're obsessed with it, and that's okay. And so, like, some people, they don't want to like study it like it's like, it's really school, and that's okay. Do I feel like I missed out on anything? I mean, the experience of, gradings, that it's different now. Like, get, all these guys that are trained with now, and doing a full grading where, I don't know, every school I'm sure does it differently, but like, the first time I did one with like all the shark tanks for the guys that are getting their
Yeah,
belts, and
every
like,
school's different.
the whip thing, and like, whatever the traditions are, it's like, that's fun. Like, that is real
I hate that
camaraderie
whip thing
building.
so much.
Yeah, I was like, what is going on here? The first time I saw that, but yeah, it's like a rite of passage, right? It's funny.
For some people, they really like that rite of passage. I just don't like it. I don't like the fact that
No,
it exists. It's like, and if people at my gym do it, but I stand on the side. Like, it's just, to each their own. Fine, but I
yeah,
just never got on board with it. I don't.
yeah,
It's not,
yeah. No, I've heard the same. It
not the
looks
kind of
at
rite of
first,
passage I'm comfortable.
yeah, I think I was kind of in the same boat. Like, from afar, it's like, what are these people doing? Why would you do that to each other? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, jujitsu is just such
So,
a
what role does
simple.
jujitsu play in your life nowadays?
I would say, like, just a hobbyist, very much more casual about it. I think, especially since getting the black belt, I think, you know, I really tried to go as hard and as much as I could. And now that I've kind of gotten here, it's not that I care less about it or anything like that. It's still a huge part of my life. But like I said, it's less pressure. Like there's less FOMO, less pressure on myself that um, I just understand. I guess the biggest thing that I learned from getting my black belt and how it impacted my life after is that I realized that I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Like, you kind of get to this point and you finally get there, but you realize like, oh my God, like this is this is just like one extra step. It's gonna be forever. Right. And once I realized jujitsu was forever, it was like less pressure to always be like improving every night. Like it was just go have fun, get the exercise, teach people. Like it just that part changed for me. But now the role that it plays, it's still yeah, it's still my outlet, it's still therapy, it's still, um, my week, right? It's like, work and I'm trying to just find time to get to the gym, right? That's how it sort of fits into my life now.
Yeah. So you had said you started in like a small town, and we said a small mining town. So I feel like that's what you were doing, right? You were like an actual miner. You were like a gold miner. Is that do I have that correct?
Yeah, so like yeah, a lot of people are in the town. Like the main industry is mining, so a lot of people that are there are, it's remote. It's like 8 months of the year is like minus 30 degrees. It's winter, it's isolated, but everybody's there for the same reason. It's to work good jobs. Mining is a really good industry. And I'm a geologist by background. I spent most of my time working underground, a mile and a half deep underground gold mine. And yeah, that was the
How'd you get
day.
into that?
I was born in an even smaller mining town. So, and like everybody in my family, like was was in mining. Mining was it's northwestern Ontario, so or northern Ontario in particular is like just there's tons of mining and forestry is sort of the historic industries, and my family was in it. My grandfather, uncles, cousins. Then I was sort of the first geologist, so went to school for geology, and then found myself working at the mine, one of the mines. Yeah.
What was it like being underground, like that far underground for actually what was your day like? Like what was the day what's a day in the life of
You get up, you first thing is like, understanding what the day is going to look like with your team, whether it's your geology team, your mining team, or whatever it might be. Everybody does the same thing, and it's like a safety huddle. It's like, what's your day look like? What are your risks? What are your hazards? Look out for each other, communicate, that type of thing. You just come up with a good plan. It's all happens pretty quickly, and then you catch the cage, you go underground, and you do your day. And underground can start off kind of intimidating, but I mean, it's Canada. It's super safe. like, um, it's not like something you'd see in the movie where the ground is terrible and there's cave-ins everywhere. It's nothing like that. It's pretty civilized. It's organized, and one of my role was to make sure that we were mining the ore body correctly and efficiently. Um, yeah, it's dusty. I mean, it's dusty and there's diesel particles, but you kind of just you kind of appreciate it after a while. And there's actually times where I miss it. Yeah.
what are you doing? Like what is you said you get in the cage, you go down, but like what is it you're spending your time actually doing? Like do you sit there with like a hammer and pick, or is there like
There's a hammer.
industrial
Yeah.
systems that
No,
are
it's
doing the
it's all
work for you?
mechanized equipment. It's giant. You know, machines that drill. It's the thing that hasn't changed since the dawn of time, is that, you drill a hole and you put explosives in it and you break rock. But now it's just there's bigger equipment, humans are less, exposed to um, the conditions and the strain of, doing it, sort of manually. So the equipment does it for you. They're just drilling holes, just picture tunnels of, just entirely rock, and there's bolts and mesh above you protecting you from any sort of falling loose ground. And then you're driving what they call a drift. You drill holes, you put explosive in it, you blast, and what you're doing is you're finding whatever the ore body is. It could be, in this case, this was gold veins. So in white quartz veins is what it would look like with visible gold throughout. And you drill and just blast those, break it up into small pieces. You put it in a bucket, you bring it up to surface, and you put it in a mill, refine it, crush it down to smaller size, douse it in some chemicals, and pull the gold out in the form of gold bars. It's sort of the gist of it anyway.
And so what's the role of a geologist on that team? That sounds like more physical stuff.
Yeah, the geologist is responsible for finding the gold, is sort of the simple one, because then you have to mine it efficiently. The guys that are there to break the rock, they're not there to engineer or tell you what's ore or waste. That is responsible of the geologist and the engineers. The geologists are telling you, okay, this is where the gold is. The engineer is telling you, this is how we're going to get it out, and then the miner executes on that. And so it's a big collaborative effort at the end of the day. Of what's exciting about it is that it's fairly fast paced to make all that happen, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about productivity and getting the rock out as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
I know like licking rocks is something that geologists do. I assume that's not how every geologist finds gold, but like how often on a regular basis were you licking rocks, just for my own morbid curiosity?
Zero. The whole licking rocks
Okay.
thing comes from,
Okay.
the salt rocks, salt minerals. I think they teach you in school, here's how you tell what salt is, and you lick it and it's like, okay, that's salt. But for the most part, yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't apply to gold mining. Smelling rocks, that's a thing.
Fair
Smelling
enough.
things, and certain things about the ore body has different smells based on the types of minerals in it.
What about it? What would you be
Sulfur,
normally
sulfur.
smelling for?
The smell of like rotten eggs, like sulfur. So
Yeah.
those sulfide minerals, when you're drilling into them or hammering them, it starts to smell like that, right? And that can be associated with gold. So there's a saying that, oh, I could smell the ore.
So it's not like dangerous when you're not like smelling for things that could end up creating dangerous situations. You're in this case actually smelling for gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You at some point after doing this for a few years decided to shift over from like mining itself, like being the
Yeah.
person in the mine to like operations. Like what precipitated that change?
Yeah, I think it's natural. Like when you're spending that much time underground with the guys who, the operators, you start to kind of think about you start to think like an operator. You start to think about, okay, there's people and equipment and rock to move, and it all has to move as in like a symphony, right, of production to for this thing to make money and to work. And so after a while, I kind of started paying more attention to that. Got a bit more interested in the actual business of mining after that. And I started to focus more on like the analytical business side, productivity, cost, like how do we make money? And you realize it's like, you know um, it's really about people and process, right? And the product obviously is the rock, but yeah, it's those three P's of any business. And so I started focusing on that, and moved into the operations. But then after that, I got in, I started doing my MBA, and I started thinking about, okay, like the mining goes like much bigger outside of the mine, right? It's a whole industry, it's a global industry. And then that's when my curiosity, I just was too curious. So I left the mining town and moved to Toronto and started working in the capital markets, which is, the mining industry. I thought, the highest level, like how do these companies get built, right? Who's running things around here? Investment banks, boards, capital financings, and that sort of thing. And now, I work for a company called SCP Resource Finance. It's basically, it's an investment bank. And my role there is to find mineral deposits around the world that could be mines or mining companies that are struggling and how that can be fixed. And we raise capital for those companies, help those companies exploit their resources that they're finding. So I went from like, the mile deep, like this is how mining works, but then it like across the world, like this is how mining works. And it's a great way to see the world and see different types of mines, like, whether it might be lithium or copper, like they're all different projects and it's done differently all around the world. It was the curiosity that kind of just kept me asking questions. And then I found myself here, and that's how I sort of found myself outside of the small mining town world, and now sort of a global explorer in this field.
So what are like the main factors that you're looking for in a mine when you're doing the due diligence
Yeah.
on not just a company, but maybe like a piece of land or something?
Mm-hmm. So like what do people look for to make a discovery is kind of what you're asking, like of something to find a project that could be a mine.
Yeah, or like what are you looking for? Yeah, what are you looking for when figuring out if a project is viable? Like
Okay, like
doing like
worthy
what does
worthy of the
diligence look
finance.
like?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
few things. I mean, obviously the data, like first and foremost, it's like, what do they have? What did you drill? What are the grades? What are the tonnages that you're seeing? The results of the data that we're dealing with here. And then obviously with experience, you can kind of
What do those
understand like,
things mean just generally?
yeah,
Like what does the
generally it's
grade
like,
mean?
yeah, the grade is like the concentration of whatever metal is that you're looking for in the ground, right? So with gold, if we measure it in grams per ton, would be something we call the grade. So how many grams of gold per ton of rock is being sampled in a drill hole or rock chips at surface, whatever it might be that you're doing. And then the second part of that, it's just simple volume, which is going to be measured on the interval that you're drilling it on, the width, the length of that drill hole. So the sample is 20 meters, right? And it's 10 grams. It's like, okay, that's interesting, right? If it's, 25 grams per ton on like, 2 centimeters, maybe that's not so viable, right? If there's not a lot of it. So we're looking for, size and grade is the sweet spot. And then what makes it viable is some threshold in between those two things, just in a general sense. Yeah, I mean, what I'm looking at is starting with that, and then, how big can it be and how high grade it is. And then you think of things like geometry, location, the people are the people doing good work, a bunch of cowboys. I'm sure a lot of people have seen the movie Gold and referenced that story of Brix that happened back in the day where people committed fraud. So that's why guys like me have a job today. Is like my job is to make sure people don't do stuff like that. Don't send a bunch of accountants to talk about rocks with geologists. So that's generally what I'm looking for.
How
Is
much
just
does
making
like the community and the people like play a role in that, like in
huge,
in that
huge.
determination?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, nowadays, mining has, in my view, like it's a really misunderstood industry in the regards of like what it really does for communities and people. Like people always say, there's always like bad examples in any sector of people doing bad things, and obviously mining's history is terrible. But I mean, generally today, it's like it's not like it was back, way back when. Like ESG, environmental, social, and governance is like the the new benchmark. And when you can't really operate anywhere without a social license, is what we would call it, right? It's like it's the approval from the people that are there, whether that might be in parts of Canada where it's the First Nations, or maybe it's just a small town that is rightly near where somebody wants to build a mine in South America, right, or Africa. It's the people having the buy-in from the people who are ultimately going to benefit the most, right, or should benefit the most, because it really is. Like I come from a mining town, and I saw what happened to the mining town when the mine closed, and I can tell you, when your only industry is mining, it's a sad result. Like you take a company that basically does everything. Your local hockey teams, your schools is donating to your hospitals, giving people jobs, building new homes. That's what they do. And then when they leave and that's not there, it's like the whole thing falls apart. It's a noble thing, especially like that's how I look at it. Like as a geologist, if you make a discovery, you could change like so many people's lives, not just the end user of the metal that you're pulling out of the ground, their day to day, whatever that may be. Maybe it's for medical equipment, maybe it's just your iPhone, but it's about what it does. It's an economic driver. Like mining is like will change people's lives where communities don't even have power, right? They don't have access to water. All of a sudden you have this mineral deposit. Now it becomes a center of gravity that you're going to build infrastructure to it, right? So all those communities along the way, they're going to get roads, they're going to get power, they're going to get access to water, heat, jobs, schools, right? So it that's how it should go. That's how it should be looked at. But instead it's looked at like companies want to come in and rape and pillage the metal out of the ground and not do anything for the communities. And it's just, you can't do that in today's world. Like you just won't happen. The governments shouldn't let it happen. So it plays a critical, absolutely
Is that
critical
what
role. It's
is
something I
that
look
kind
for
of
immediately.
is that kind of gentrification like the responsibility of the government, the responsibility of the mining company? Like who's ultimately responsible for making sure that that gentrification goes in a good way as opposed to the, potential bad side that you're like.
Yeah, no, that's it, right? Like that's the question. Ultimately, the company has to be a good, steward of these proponents, right? And they might want to do right, but the government also plays a big role in that, right? The government might want certain profits and royalties that make maybe the business hard to do, right? Or maybe they're not subsidizing the roads to get there, helping out. And and then maybe the communities just don't know, like they need to be educated, and it's going to take a long time to just show them like, hey, we're responsible. The relationship has to start. The best thing for everybody is you start early. You do right by the community. You work with the government, and hopefully the government wants to work with you and wants it built and understands the balance between, we need to make sure money gets to these communities, but people in the government might want money. Like this is why it's an interesting business, because and it moves around depending on, like, elections change, investable places, right? Like election might change, or a new government might come in and think that they're doing right by people by playing hardball with mining companies that pay 10% royalties on their, you know already, and they say, what, we want more. And the mining companies are like, well, this is sort of unprecedented. They might pull out of the country completely, or they get the mine taken away, and now that's gone. It ruins everything for the people, right? Now the people don't have any jobs because the mine's closed down, right? So there's so many dynamics to play. It's not one thing or other, but that's a huge part for investors, the people who are providing the capital, to be aware of, right? One is the company doing right, right? And then it's like, do the people want it? So I'll go to sites sometimes, and I'll meet, I'll just talk to locals. That's all I'll do. I'll go to the coffee shops, I'll go to the farms, talk to the farmer, like just and ask, how do you feel about this? Right. And if you get a sense like, oh, I want the jobs, but like the next town over, they hate mining companies because of this that happened 20 years ago or something. Right. So that all has to be taken into play, and at least I'm for what I do. But what it gets me excited is when it all works. Like you go there, the people want it, the company's doing a good job, right? You meet the local government, the ministers, they're excited about it. They've got a plan. They're in good communication. It's like, okay, great. This is what you want to see, you know? Um, and yeah,
Is there like a
it's not
proper
always
way to like
straightforward.
wind down a mine like when it runs out?
Yeah, absolutely. Way back when, there used to be, that's where the mining companies went so wrong, right? Like 100 years ago, they would just leave, and you'd leave like tailings dams and environmental like problems and water, like not like just all these problems would just become inherited by the local community or the local government or township. So that is like a big no-no. Like that doesn't like that is a no-fly zone anymore. So right off the bat, when you go to build a mine, the biggest part for a lot of these governments is that you have to provide them with a closure plan, and you have to secure it with capital. To say like at the end of the 10 years or 20 years that this is done mining, here's the capital that's going to take to do that. And here's a very detailed, it'll be like, hundreds and hundreds of pages of engineering, proven technology, ways to reclaim the land. And honestly, you can go look at so many examples of this. I've been to projects, old projects, where I can't tell that the topography is actually man-made. It looks so natural, like the rolling hills, it's all green, and it's like, no, that was an old, mine. And I'm like, you would never tell, right? These things can be reclaimed, and a lot of it changes on what you're mining. Like
I feel
some
like we never hear
things,
about that.
no, because the ones they're going to show you is like, you know, tailing dam failure, orange water, that type of stuff. They're going to show you that all the time. And rightfully so. We can't forget these things that didn't happen. Like they did, like they're big deals. Like there are cases that the big cases in mining are so catastrophic. Like they don't happen all the time, but it happens to be some of like the really big projects where you have a tailings dam failure. Like we're talking like billions and billions of tons like of material, that have engineering failures. And, those make headline news, right? Like that's going to be on CNN. And people are going to be like, evil mining company, the BP, oil spill, right? It's like these are major, but those mines, like how many of those actually exist that are like those scales? There's actually not a lot, right? But yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't focus on the good about mining. Mining industry is very well aware that we just have so much PR to do, like really educating people
Yeah.
about it. And people just think, I'll be at a brewery talking to just some local, and they would just be like, well, isn't don't we just not need to do mining? Like, isn't just mining bad just all the time? And I'm like, God, like you're holding like an iPhone, like you probably drive an electric car, and they just have no idea. Without mining, most
So the
cities
average
would just be a
person like
pile of
doesn't
rubble.
realize that they need all of these components to like build the batteries for the cars or the chips and
Yeah.
circuitry for the phone. Like it's okay, interesting.
Yeah, no, nobody really just everybody wants all these things. They just don't want it. They just don't want to see it, right? It's like the food industry. It's
Yeah.
like people want good
Yeah.
quality meat. They just don't want to see it prepared. They don't want to hunt. They don't
Yeah.
want to see how, a deer or, a moose gets dressed. It's like it's where you get, if you can't grow it, it has to be mined. Like that's it. So all these things that you own, and if you want an electric car, like everybody's pushing for. If you just want a car, if you want a bike, it doesn't matter, right? It you have to mine. It has to come from somewhere. And the thing is like these things aren't renewable. Like they're finite. Like they're gonna get put into your computers. You might be able to recycle some of it, but it has to come out somewhere else. So the more people want, the more they want to build cities or anything. We have to go find more of these things. There's a
So
drastic
what are the
scarcity.
important things like worldwide now?
Well, the big things right now is the like the staples. I hate the word critical minerals because every mineral is critical. Um,
Fair enough.
you always need copper, nickel, right? These things are in everything. It makes steel. Copper's in almost everything, and now like that's become this like matter of national security, and we need to secure all these supply chains in these regards because the world is becoming more electric. People don't realize how much copper is needed or how much nickel is needed to do what governments and politicians are saying they want to do by the time that they are saying. It's in my world, I'm so close to it. It's complete panic. It's so much worse than people realize that governments are fighting right now behind the scenes basically to secure anything in any country that they can mine and source and give to either the Western supply chains or the Eastern supply chains. It's basically an arms race or a Cold War, as you call it. Like that's how serious this is.
What does that mean? Like, what is the panic? What does panic mean the way you say it?
Yeah. Well, it's basically, is America going to be like America doesn't want to buy Chinese electric cars, like, and they don't want their allies to buy Chinese electric cars, but like that's the direction that it's going. Like China is ready to supply the world with their electric vehicles, and if you do that, you're a dominant economy. Like this is what built America. Graduated from horses and carriages to, Ford engines, GM, that supplying the world with automobiles. That's the biggest driver
Why
for
is
the
China in
economy.
so much of a better position?
China started this like 60 years ago. They started picking out certain mineral deposits around the world and their own that they have, and slowly started building up a supply chain because it was cheaper, and that's what you want. Like Elon Musk wants affordable electric cars for Americans. If you mine that, like it's no brainer. Like that's why we don't build furniture in downtown Toronto anymore, right? It's like we buy that furniture from somewhere else that does it for cheaper so that it's cheaper for us. And the same thing happened in mining. So they're going to buy, we were buying stuff from China who has lower thresholds for everything we talked about on social, environmental, all that stuff. And they keep the cost real low so that we could drive fancy cars for good, reasonable prices. And so now it's changing. It's like, well, we don't want to buy the cars from China. We need to supply the world with these electric cars, or else, I mean, that's it. GM, Ford, Tesla, say bye bye, right? So all the processing that
So does that
all
create
these
like a lot
minerals,
more tension between the United States and China?
absolutely. You could look this up. It's like you could read in between the lines, like why are the governments talking about securing minerals so badly? It's happening whether or not you like it or not. It's serious. Anything that is the nickel that is mined in the United States still has to be processed somewhere else, whether it's Canada, overseas, China, right? The lithium mined in South America has to be processed somewhere else, China. The rare earths mined anywhere outside of China has to be processed there. So they control everything. So it's you cannot not send your material to China. Uranium gets enriched on other parts of the world, right? So whether or not you want these things, you want cheaper power, cheaper energy, cleaner energy, you're going to have to mine it somewhere, and you're going to have to build the infrastructure to process it there, or somewhere where they're going to just you don't want it to be concentrated in one particular area. It's completely concentrated right now in the east. Indonesia controls a lot of the nickel supply. China controls rare earths and lithium processing, and that's it. And so now this huge push where it's like, well, wait a minute. If China turns off that tap, what do we do? Where are we going to get it from? Right? So that's what's happening right now. I could tell you, the the U.S. government or the West in general is so far behind. Right? There's hardly mines in Europe to help them out, so they just rely on the rest of the world. And where they all end up going, it's probably Africa, South America, right? And they're in the position to benefit. The United States and Canada are a little bit behind on all this. Just getting things built, getting the infrastructure set up. It's a real anybody can go. I recommend people read books like The Volt Rush. They can get that on Amazon. You'll come up the curve really quickly as the average person to understand where we're going. And The New Map is another book that's really good as well.
Link to these in the show notes. I'll get the names from you afterwards so that anybody who's listening can like chase down this information. What does this like, at least when the US or China or even some of the European countries, like at least the governments are reasonably stable and consistent. But in places like Africa that are less consistent, and have regime changes and whatever, even to some extent in South America, like what does that do to the volatility? Does that create like a bigger problem for the West? Are there better tactics to use? Like what happens there?
That's a great question. That's like a whole hour long conversation. But that comes into it. Like for me, in my position as an analyst, like that, these are things that you got to know. You got to understand geopolitics because where's the money going to go to build these projects if parts of the world are unsafe and the government can change out and be tossed out? The mines could be taken away by the government, taking supply offline, right? And now we're going down a rabbit hole, but just if for any, like just go and research what's happening in West Africa, right? West Africa parts, at least a lot of parts of it, including Mali, was a darling child for gold exploration for a long time. And now we've got, with Russian influence, governments being overthrown, mine sites being taken away from companies, deposits, basically uninvestable for the West, and then pulling, essentially control out of the Western hands of Western companies. And we have to shift. So then you look Eastern Africa, all these different countries are, where the US and the Western nations have better relationships with. And it's a little, more in our interest to be working with those countries because, hey, they might have the largest nickel supply for us, right? And the governments are more stable for in that regard because, you don't mess with US allies. So that's a real thing. And you have to take that into consideration when investing. And some countries right now are totally, like they were totally in play 4 or 5 years ago. And now essentially it's like, well, no, that's a no-fly zone for a lot of Western capital.
What about the ocean? I mean, I feel like the land is one thing, but the ocean, not that it's untouched or anything, but comparatively, there's like probably technological challenges. But because it's not clear land, like what does that end up looking like in terms of geopolitics and the, I guess, Cold War race that you were referring to, getting to that?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. That's a little less conventional, and there are, you know, a lot, like geologically, like a lot of minerals to be extracted from the bottom, certain parts of the bottom of the ocean. Like these are where some of the deposits that are on land today once started, right? It's oceanic crust getting pushed onto, land and so on and so forth. But I won't dive into that part. Just it's so unconventional. It's so uncertain. Like we need solutions now. Like this, we can't. We should be looking at other ways and should being innovative. Like there's a lot of innovation right now just to find solutions for extrapolating lithium, right? That's probably where like a ton of innovation is going.
Can you
But
just talk a little bit about what some of that technological innovation is? Like, I'm actually like really curious, like what kind of innovation people are looking to do, and both in mining and in the supply chain parts of it, et cetera.
yeah, so like to get to battery grade lithium, it's quite an extensive process. But there's typically three mineral arrangements, deposit styles where you could source lithium from. The two kind of main ones are brines, which are like ancient ocean floors in South America. Could be they look like giant salt plains. You make like a white powder and process those. That's generally pretty cheap. It's just about drying thing out, using the sun and evaporation techniques. Whereas hard rock lithium, which is done, well, really lithium is everywhere, but these styles really matter because the economics change and the supply change and how you process them changes. So hard rock and brines. And then the third one, which is less conventional, is lithium clay. And that's what you're seeing in Nevada. There's a mine, the first one ever kind of being built right now in Nevada at commercial scale, right? That that alone unlocks like that innovative technology to process these things at economic numbers would be game changing, to say the least. Beyond that, like this sort of new technology that's coming through is called direct lithium extraction, which is like completely early days. They're just starting to really test this thing at lab scale or commercial testing right now. But that alone would like disrupt the lithium sector completely because it would make it basically is like giant giant, I don't even know how to explain it so simply. It's like a filter press of concentrating lithium extraction. You're taking things that would normally be uneconomic grades and then putting it through this process, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, this actually is economic and we could do it at scale. So that technology alone would be pretty disruptive to the whole sector. But that's probably one of the biggest ones that maybe keeps me up at night because it could really turn things upside down. If it works out.
Are these things happening in other mineral or material pieces as well? Like you sort of focused on lithium there, but it does it all. Are these things happening on like nickel and copper and other
Yeah,
stuff that's similar?
yeah. Nickel kind of has gone through a big one. You know, it was thought before that nickel sulfides would make a class one nickel end product, which is really important for steel and stainless steel. And there was there's two types of deposits. Just in general, is like nickel sulfides and then nickel laterites. Laterites are typically really big, low grade, and they're pretty disruptive to the environment to mine them out and really capital intensive. So like that's the stuff that's being mined in Indonesia, and so there's a lot of environmental concerns that come with these things. But what the technology, these HPAL plants as they call them, they figured out how to make class one nickel from these types of deposits. So that changed. Like if anybody was looking, you could look at the price of nickel over the last 3 years and what they've ever like the Indonesian supply. This what was kind of typically referred to as like dirty nickel has hit the market and destroyed the price of nickel at an alarming rate. And now, again, we're circling back to like what this means to Western supply chains is that if you want your nice Tesla or electric car, you're going to be buying from this stuff from Indonesia, which, there's a lot of concerns. I haven't seen it firsthand, but, a lot of people say it's what they're doing over there is pretty bad for the environment. And it's only a matter of time before they've kind of the cat's going to get out of the bag there. But, they control the nickel process right now and the supply. They can
Is there
manipulate
any
the price.
watchdogs that are like responsible for this kind of a thing? Like in the same way there's like a human rights watch front on the UN side, is there like a watchdog for this like mining behavior?
I'm sure I've read some headlines about it. I think it's only a matter of time that a whale washes up on shore maybe and people start caring, or the local communities, or maybe these headlines are blowing it out of proportion. I know some companies that operate there that are doing just fine and they're very socially responsible and seem very environmentally conscious. And so who knows, but that to me is like something that people don't talk about. They just want their iPhones and they want their electric cars, and it's like, but they don't want to invest in the nickel in the United States to go mine it in Michigan or Minnesota or wherever, and or Canada. They just want they just want the cheapest option. And so it's a huge we're not like this
But there
huge
is
dance right now.
nickel in like Canada and in the US.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
there are deposits and like we know about them and we're choosing not to mine them kind of a thing.
Yeah, choosing not to mine them, choosing not to accelerate their development, or just incapable of financing them or bringing them online fast enough, right? Like if Indonesia could pump out more nickel and the price of nickel stays below a certain price, the incentive is not there to invest in the projects in Canada where our cost curve, we're higher up on the cost curve. I'm talking about
That
projects
makes
that don't
sense.
have any infrastructure, but like we have a world-class nickel camp in Sudbury. That thing's been mined for 100 years, right? And has supplied the world with nickel for a long time, and refine it as well. But in the United States, I think there's only one nickel mine in the United States, and it doesn't have its own refinery, so you still have to go somewhere else, right? So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of bureaucratic red tape that is not being answered for. I think that Brazil, Australia, these are places where you can basically build a mine in less than 3 years, like permit and build a mine and do it safely, well studied on the environmental front. That makes it investable too. For investors, that's what they want. They want to see a line of sight to that. In Canada, the biggest problem is, and people just, the government and the parties, that the stakeholders, they don't really respect the, like, who's buttering their bread at the end of the day. And I'm going to speak on behalf of investors. It's like our investors would probably rather light their money on fire than trust, the government, or other stakeholders on a permitting process that has no guaranteed timeline. It's just the way it is. It needs to get cleaned up and done right. I'm not saying skip environmental responsibilities and engineering studies, but there's something's got to be
You're
rational
just
here,
talking
right?
about like good project management and time boxing and being smart about the execution process, which is honestly in government projects always time, project management's always a challenge in
Yeah.
government processes, at least in my
Yeah, you're
experience.
exactly right. Whether it's building a new condo building in Toronto or New York, like you're still gonna have to go through all these chains. I'm just saying they're way too long. Like mining cycles go like this. You're talking about catching a window here where you have a very brief window to make attract serious investment, that are going to change people's lives today, not 20 years from now, 40 years. Like that, we can change things today. We can get this mine up and running. It'll help the communities. Like if it works, it works. If everybody's happy, it works. But it's the process that can't seem to agree on how quickly it should be, because it's so much red tape.
Is there anything about mining that people just don't seem to be able to wrap their head around? Or is it just the kind of stuff like, hey, this is in everything and it fuels your daily life and the average person just doesn't get how important it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the average person might have some understanding, but not really. People just talk to, ask questions about, like I tell them I'm from, I work in this business, and it's usually kind of like negative connotations that come with it. People just don't get it. And from the investor side of things, the capital market side, like people would rather give their money to like a crypto scam, which helps nobody, right? These aren't real tangible investments. It's gambling. And we're talking about a sector that is underappreciated, undercapitalized. Yes, it's high risk, but you could have a direct impact on, you know, the world, really. Not just the local communities. Like you're having a real impact here, right? And you got to focus on
Does
good
any of
teams,
that have
good
to do with like a
projects.
high barrier to entry financially? Like crypto's a much lower barrier to entry, like the average
Yeah,
person can, do forex and whatever, but like it's a high barrier to get into mining and supporting mining operations, it seems like.
yes and no. Like the earlier stage stuff, it all starts with the same. It's venture capital. Venture capital is venture capital. Like it's definitely high risk and probably a bit more technical than I think crypto is. I think people think they understand crypto, but you
The
know,
average person does not understand crypto, I can promise that. I know that for a
yeah.
fact.
At the end of the day, people are looking for fast, quick gains, right? I can tell you that in the junior exploration part, right, it's venture capital. You might make a discovery, you might not, right? But we're talking about thousands of percent gains, right? If that works out. And they're there. And these are penny stocks, but that, and then one step up above from that, it's like if you can actually pick a good project and depending on the cycle, right, and different factors, it's like you can make 500%. In a typical gold rally, the developer space can make anywhere from 300, 500% gain in a rate cutting cycle, right? You can go
That's a
and
lot.
look at that is, historically the case. So,
Yeah.
it's tough, I think, for people to be attracted to the sector as as sort of a long-term investment, especially for the generalist, right? When you got these other things that you could be, doing spicy crypto plays that, maybe you're making 4x on a day trade or something. Everything, the whole world is very short termism, right? That's just the kind of the name of the game now. There's very few people out there that are looking for like value trades. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna invest in this, you know, world-class nickel deposit. It will be a mine one day. I'm just going to hold that, set it and forget it. I'll move on. People aren't thinking that way anymore.
To kind of bring this like a little bit full circle, I mean, is there anything that you have learned that, from the stress management and the like pressure that sometimes this world brings or jujitsu brings and like moved any of those lessons on or off the mat?
Yeah, like I mean, jujitsu number one, it's like it just comes with a great stress managing tool. It's a great outlet, confidence building, all those great things that you take off the mat and apply it to your daily life. I had you know, in mining, especially at the mine site level, you can have some pretty big personalities. And I had a boss once. He was a bit of a pit bull, and he was kind of the guy kind of lose his head in a meeting, breathing heavy, red in the face, and I remember him pulling me aside once after a pretty heated meeting with some other people, and we go back to my office, and I remember him saying to me, he's just like, "Why are you so calm in this situation?" It's like I want to rip people's heads off. He's like, I want to throw things. Like, he just had no way of managing his emotions or an outlet or anything, right? And so he was the kind of guy like just kind of whatever moment you caught him in that's the moment. And I remember kind of thinking about that and analyzing it. I'm just like, work like this doesn't stress me out. Okay. Like, what could be more stressful than like 3, 4 days a week? Somebody on the mat is just trying to strangle you, right? It's like, you got this like 250-pound guy that's smothering you. You're tired. It's, 10, 20 minutes into a rolling session and he's just crushing you. And you're just trying to survive, catch your breath, stay calm. It's like, you know, somebody saying something to me in a meeting or work is getting busy. It's like, that doesn't stress me out. I'm, no, that's how I view it now. Like at the time, maybe I didn't think about it, but I remember him asking me that, and I was just like, this doesn't bother me. Like this person saying something to me means nothing. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything. It's just work. It's just life. Don't take yourself too seriously. But that 150-pound purple belt that's got really insane chokes. That's like just putting one on me. It's like that's problem. That's real problem solving in real time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that probably the average person who doesn't have any experience dealing with emotions doesn't realize how many outlets they have to learn. Like therapy, jujitsu, martial arts in general. But it's just like there are options. You don't
Yeah.
have to just start yelling.
Yeah. Do you do other like other outside of jiu-jitsu, do you do other well, I see some Muay Thai pads back there, so you obviously do some striking as well. But like do you run on the treadmill, go for runs, hikes? Like what else do you do?
So I do a lot of. I used to do a lot more hiking when I had a dog. Since we put the dog down, I don't do that much anymore. But I have spent. I'm over 40, and I've got nearly 40 years of martial arts experience in some form. Everything from Taekwondo. I was an All-American wrestler. I did some judo, 10 plus years of Jiujitsu, MMA, Muay Thai.
Wow.
I've really like run the gamut because I just find martial arts to be a beautiful form of self-expression, and I am absolutely not artistic. I can't dance, I
Yeah.
can't sing, but I find martial arts to be like a beautiful form of self-expression that I've managed to understand and been able to like use as an outlet.
Do you run on the treadmill or like lift weights, just like basic stuff? See, like
No,
that's see,
everybody hassles me about it.
it's it's tough, right? Like again, I'm just coming back to like that whole stress management thing, but like being present. Like it's martial arts, whether it's striking or doing jiu-jitsu, like sparring, there's nothing else that you could just you have to be present for. Like if you're thinking about groceries, you know, and somebody's on your back trying to strangle you, or someone's standing in front of you, you know, striking. It's like that's the difference between a real bad, sparring match, right? If you're not fully in it.
Yeah.
So I find like I try to do some other stuff to, run on the treadmill or whatever, let's just lift weights. I'm still thinking about my day. I'm still thinking about whether or not, some other country's gonna invade some other country or like, or like what I gotta do tomorrow or something. Like my brain, but martial arts, it's the only thing where nothing else matters. It's like not thinking about my day, not thinking about finances, not thinking about problems, health issues, nothing. It's just what's happening in the moment. So it makes a lot of just
Yeah.
other activities I used to like pretty boring.
Yeah, I every so often I'll want to get into weightlifting because I want to like, make sure I have longevity, but I find it boring. And then people are like, "Well, do this, do this, do this." And I'm like, the only time running ever worked for me was when I would go on like long runs, but you need to build up to it. Like when I was younger, I used to do 15, 20-mile runs, not like timing or in the city. I would just get out into the woods in like upstate New York, and I would just go run and then turn around and come on long trails, and it'd be a couple of hours, like, so I could back into roughly how long I thought I was running or how far I went. But that was the only time I felt like the real sort of runner's high, or I could like get out of my head a little bit. But it took a while, and martial arts has always just been that thing for me that I was like, yeah, when I'm trying to strangle somebody, or somebody's trying to, even when I roll with students, when I'm not like really needing to pay a ton of attention, but I want to be present to make sure I can give them advice if they ask for it, or um, not hurt them if they're smaller, just from a size thing. I still need to be present in ways
Yeah,
that like the other stuff just never did for me.
yeah, agreed, agreed. It certainly, yeah, makes. I always want to lift weights, but it is really important too. I think the longevity, as you said. So I still try. I still try to do it, but it's
Yeah,
tough.
it's hard. I never get myself to do it. Is there any piece of advice that you just kind of wish everyone knew, like about anything, nothing in particular, or everything? Up to you.
Piece of advice. I don't think so. I think when it comes to jujitsu, it's like there's all the same stuff that people tell you all the time, but time on the mat, just show up, focus on technique, position before submission, and all that stuff is all pretty cliche to say, but it's one of those things where the longer you do it, you understand how important that is. The thing that I always tell people, and it doesn't matter age or size or anything, it's or belt. It's like if you are doing jujitsu and you are starting out, like once you you know, get into it for at least a year and you understand what I'm about to say, but it's really like focus on defense. Like really focus on it. Like it pays dividends to just really understand how to get out of things. And if you're always the guy that's like so focused on being on top and smashing people, it's like as you get older, things change. The every decade older you get, comparatively to the belt level you're at, like your you know technique's going to change things, but like you're going to be eventually 50 plus years old going against like jacked 20-year-olds that are like trying to take your head off. And the only thing that's going to help you is like real honest fundamental technique understanding of you know the body movements and stuff like that. And that's what helps me. Like if I'm tired and it's no gi and I don't have lapels to play with and I'm going against just an absolute savage, I follow a lot of the Gracie mentality, and like, heat on Gracie always says it's like sometimes it's just about not losing, not necessarily beating, somebody. It's just if you're not losing, and that style might be really boring to people, but it's definitely pays dividends to focus on that as soon as you can. Like blue belt, that's where your like animal instinct comes out. But if you can hone that through blue and purple, like every decade, the longer you train, it's going to pay dividends as you get older.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I spent a lot of time focusing on defense. Like when I was training at Marcelo Garcia in New York City, I was, going to their afternoon classes, not the evening ones. And the afternoons was where all the brown and black belts were. And I was a white and a blue belt. And, they say you're the nail until you can become the hammer. Well, I was the nail. And so I needed a lot of defense. And the Preet Mickelson stuff that's like out on YouTube these days is like all of his defensive BJJ is fantastic, and I love teaching that. I love spending time there, and it really gives me this feeling of confidence that like even if I get some crazy 250-pound black belt, I can still feel safe and comfortable knowing that I have good
100%.
fundamental defense.
That's the best. To me, if you can roll with a really big person straight off the street who's super unpredictable and you're just in complete control and you're not getting tired, maybe you're not submitting them, right? But at the end of the roll, my favorite part of jiu-jitsu now for me is like that moment where it's not even like you didn't tap them. It wasn't really hard roll, but it was just this, the person couldn't do anything. And at the end of the roll, their mind is blown. And that's the switch where they're like, I need to learn that. Like, what was that? Right. And like especially from the big guys, right? Because they're like, I just felt like an infant for 5 minutes. Right. I held my own against these other guys. These are white belts, blue belts. I'm a big guy. But what was that? And that is something that excites me after certain situations rolling with like big new people, like where that switch goes on. Could go the other way. Some guys are like, well, that was bullshit. I'm never training again. But most of the time, guys get excited, and that's what you want.
Yeah. Actually, that's funny. That's actually, I think in a very similar way, that's my favorite thing about jujitsu. Like, I love teaching, I love helping people learn new things. But oftentimes, one of my favorite moments consistently is when you make eye contact after a roll and you shake hands, you whatever, and you just like, it's that non-verbal, sometimes verbal, but that non-verbal exchange that happens right at the end of a roll. And it's like, there's just that, it's usually respect. And it's like, it doesn't matter how good or badly you did. It's like, we just went at it for a few minutes. And it's like, yeah, like we did that. And I love that moment. And I love getting to do that, round after round after round at open mat or class.
Yeah, agreed. It's funny because you asked earlier about is the black belt like a big target on your back? Well, I travel a lot. So now I just bring my gi and I go to gym, right? And I find that when I go to gym, like that is, you know, I'll get them. I don't compete very often anymore, but I feel like I compete a lot because when I go to these gyms, it's usually like just, oh, new guy, I've never trained before, like with him before. I have no idea what he's about to bring to the table. So it's completely like a tournament, unpredictable situation. They're feeling the same way. And sometimes guys are just chilling and it's all good. You can feel it and I won't turn it on or anything. But then there's that one of those guys that just wants, let's go. And you hit that flow state at the end of it. You're kind of both looking at it. You can kind of tell like maybe he's plateauing in his gym. So this was like really good for him. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like, and then but I got to do that. For him, it's one roll, right? because all the rest of them, it's his environment, it's all his buddies. But for me, now I got to go through every single one of those guys in the gym in like a regular training match where I do roll with like 10 people, 10, 20 people, and it's like they're all trying to kill me.
Yeah.
So it keeps you sharp,
Yeah.
but it's a good feeling.
Yeah. I'm a little nervous about when that happens for me because like as I'm getting a little older, I'm like, oh, this I don't want the target on my back, in my 50s, but it is what it is.
But that's what I'm saying, that philosophy of defense, it's like if I just need to just control this, I rarely get drawn in to someone's pace. Like you must have the ability
same.
to control and dial everything back to your pace. That's the part I don't know how to give people that advice or how to train for that. But defense is usually like you usually kind of find it there because you get really comfortable in bad situations. You get really comfortable being uncomfortable and realizing, talking to yourself, saying like, I'm safe here. Like I don't need to explode to get out because he's going to take my back. He has to do something because I can breathe. I'm chilling. He's not like I'm gaining back my energy. He needs to do something. And in that moment, I'm going to escape. Right. And that's how I survive because like half the time, especially I'm getting older and sometimes I get off a plane and I go right to a gym. Right. I've been sitting for 12 hours or something like that. And like now I have to be careful of like just blowing up my knee in a half guard. It's like,
Yeah.
I just, you got to just train differently. If anything, that's the advice I give to people is like, as you get older, it's like, don't trust your neck, your joints. Like you really got to do things. You got to focus on recovery. It's not like you can't get away with just like showing up to open mat, not warming up and not stretching afterwards. Like do it for the longevity is my advice.
Love that. That's how I think too. What are you excited for about the future?
I mean, if you weren't listening, I'm actually like pretty much a doomsdayer and I'm scared for the world.
Well, and that's actually why I'm so interested to hear your answer to this.
I don't even know. That's, I have to like turn that switch off in my head, right? It's like if you could really, when you're this close to like, things, you kind of becomes like, outlook becomes very bleak because you think that all these things are happening around you around the world. You can't control them. And, you have to just turn that off and just enjoy life and think about what's in front of you. What am I most excited about? I just live it day by day. I'm grateful for, what I do, grateful for jiu-jitsu and how it's changed my life and influenced my life every day and my health. That's
I love that. The older I get, the more I feel just gratitude for, you know, being healthy, getting to live day by day, and like the things that jujitsu's given me, that's community and friends and like a good job. So yeah, I think that's a pretty healthy outlook from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Brandon. Is there anything that you want to promote?
Promote? Not really. I mean, I'm just going to reiterate, I work for a firm called SCP Resource Finance. We're, Toronto-based mining investment firm, mining specialist group. If people are interested in investing in the mining space, they should look us up. My wife, she has a travel company called the Solo Travel Collection that offers, women the opportunity to travel solo and safety, amongst like-minded people. That's the Instagram handle. That's pretty much.
That's amazing. Cool. Brandon, thank you so much for your time today. This was a fascinating conversation. I really feel like I learned a lot about the global mining industry.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. So hopefully I didn't bore your listeners too much, but it's a fun industry. I totally encourage. It's great for people
If it
to
did,
find
too
work.
bad. I enjoyed it.
Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about mineral development projects, geology, or what it was like to advance in the Gracie University curriculum, feel free to reach out to Brandon. If you find yourself near Toronto, Canada, or think you can catch Brandon on some of his world travels, please message him directly on Instagram. You can find his contact information and additional links to the websites and books discussed in the show notes. If you enjoy the content, please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And as always, thank you for your time and attention.